I played Skyrim fairly heavily when it first came out. I didn't get to where I beat it, but I was staying up super late. I mean, even for me. So there was a point where I played the game hardcore at one point, and even though I don't now, I still did at that time.
There's a lot of people that treat a hardcore game player as somebody who beats games as thoroughly or even just as quickly as possible. So I've actually run across a few of these myself, of people who will buy a game, basically beat it within 2 days, even if it's a really long multi-hour game, sell it so they can get to the next one. And they just keep repeating this process. It's just this mindset of them that they've got to beat these games and dominate it and then move on.
And see, over such a short play life, I don't think you can really dominate a game if you're beating them in, a few days or a week. You almost have to not really have a job to be able to do something like that. Now, there are games out there that are astronomically short compared to the buy-in price. I haven't played it yet, so if I'm wrong, don't flame me, but I heard Lollipop Chainsaw was incredibly short.
I believe it clocks in about 4 hours with cutscenes.
That's what I heard. 4 hours was the number that I heard. So it sounds accurate so far. It's a game that I was going to buy, but because I heard it's such a short game, I'm waiting until it goes down in price. Mm-hmm. Because to me, $60 for 4 hours of playtime isn't worth it. Regardless of whether I do that in one sitting, that somebody might say, "Oh, he's hardcore playing that game." I don't think 4 hours can be considered hardcore.
I do believe there's different difficulties and different unlockables and stuff like that might make the game replayable in certain ways. I know it has multiple endings.
Multiple endings. That's the way to make a game replayable for those that are enjoying the story. Mm-hmm. But if you don't enjoy the story, then it doesn't matter.
I know it's kind of derailing the conversation, but I think it kind of fits in the hardcore versus casual conversation anyway. And that is, I'm actually going to go a little retro gaming here, because a lot of people are considering retro gaming actually a hardcore thing. People playing NES games. We just talked about Battletoads earlier, about how it was kicking your tail.
Yes.
Because it has stood the test of time as being one of those all-time difficult games, if only for a couple of certain levels and specifically.
Yes.
But how many of those games that weren't RPGs could you beat in 30 minutes? Quite a few of them.
I could beat the original Mario Brothers in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. We actually did a time run in the mall to one of those stands that had the game set up, and using the warp pipes and just blazing through the levels, I beat the game in roughly 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of speedrunners who've done that too, so it's not just a claim, it can be done.
Yes.
And granted, you are using warps, so there's kind of a difference there, but it's just still the point of, back then, games were generally between $20 and $60 then, too. And we didn't really consider game length as part of what made a game good, or if we wanted to buy it or not. If that was the case, a lot more RPGs would have been bought in the day.
I think it can be said, though, that the reason that games were short back in the day and we still found them engaging is because games were still new. Not very many people had played them, so not very many people understood the controls or had an instant grasp of how the controller works. And I think that's the difference between games back then and games today. Even though there are more buttons, kids grow up around video games. Mm-hmm. If their parents play video games, their friends play video games. So it's something that they grow up with. And it's not one of these things that just happen to come into being like they did when you and I were children.
Because I date all the way back to the old Coleco. We had games like Pong and tennis and hockey, and they all looked exactly alike. And then the Atari 2600, which basically created the whole console generation.
The Atari 2600 was probably one of my first actual brushes with gaming. My great-grandmother had one, my grandmother had one, and we would spend a lot of time over there, just playing the Atari. And that was what the kids did. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have too many issues with those games. There were some that I played more than others, but they were just short little time wasters that I could sit down and play while Mom and Dad were, talking about adult stuff.
And ironically, a lot of the games we played back in those days, we played just as much as we do now. It's just we usually died a lot quicker and had to start all over again.
Exactly.
But even that aside, would you consider, in today's market, those older games being considered hardcore? Loaded question.
I think that, like I said earlier, you can play them hardcore, but I don't think any one game, I don't think a game itself makes itself to be hardcore or casual. I think it's all about how you play it. I can sit there and loop my score over and over and over in video pinball, and you might say that I'm playing it hardcore because I'm spending so much time looping my score. You know, if I were to run a 24, 48-hour marathon to see how often I could loop my score without dying, then, you know, losing the ball, then, you know, you could say that I'm playing it hardcore. So it's just one of those yes but no.
But in today's market, most of the retro games are either being marketed as a hardcore thing or a nostalgia thing. And the nostalgia kind of works on the retro level, but then you have these other people that it's more about beating the late great oldies, people going back and beating the Battletoads, just so they can say that they've beat this game.
That actually is an interesting thing that is happening, because a lot of people hear that these games are difficult back in the day. Mm-hmm. I was actually starting to think that I had surpassed Battletoads until I got to the level with the racing, where you dodge the brick walls and the traps. And I got through it, the first couple sections without dying, and then they just started coming at you without warning. I couldn't get past that part.
A lot of memorization.
Mm-hmm. And that's what those games like that were. It was all about memorization.
And really good timing.
Impeccable.
And thankfully you still got that because of all those years of Mega Man.
Yes, Mega Man has actually improved my hand-eye coordination, my ability to time things, that and fighting games.
Smash Brothers in particular.
I love Smash Brothers. That is a casual fighting game to most people that are into fighting games, but I play that puppy hardcore.
And yet another example of exactly what we're saying. There is this little dividing line that is really up to the player of what's hardcore and what's casual. It's almost opinion based on how you play the game yourself.
And that, in large part, is why almost nobody will agree on what is casual and what is hardcore.
Mm-hmm. That is a really good stopping point, actually.
I think so,
because
too.
That was a nice conclusion there.
It was.
So with that said, I think we pretty much hit exactly what we meant to hit with this episode.
All of the nuances of people's opinions, casual gaming, Zynga, World of Warcraft, I think we've covered pretty much all of it.
No, I doubt we've probably answered any questions that people are just dying to have answered, but I think we may have given some people something to think about, regardless of which side of the fence they're on, or even straddling the fence.
It's what people make of it.
And that should be pretty much gaming in general. I think there's way too much judgmentalism and criticism about stuff based on how good the graphics are, or who made the game, or fan loyalties, and there's just all sorts of stuff that can really go thrown out the window when it all comes down to really, do you enjoy this game? And maybe that's a conversation for another week. Not necessarily next week, but
not necessarily.
Those games we enjoy that nobody else does. Those little hidden secret games that we enjoyed that we're ashamed to admit. Anyway, thoughts for later.
I don't know what you mean.
So this was episode 2, September 15th, 2012, even though we'll be uploading this Monday, which is, of course, the 17th.
If you want to get a hold of us, you can always reach us at PrinnyCast@gmail.com.
Or you can find us at Twitter at PrinnyCast. I hope you enjoyed.
And we'll see you next time on PrinnyCast.